Sometimes the worst betrayal becomes the doorway to your greatest blessing. When Sarah Martinez thought her world was ending in a coffee shop parking lot, watching her husband of 12 years kiss another woman, she had no idea that this devastating moment would lead her to a love so pure and authentic that it would heal wounds she didn't even know existed. This is the story of how a woman's broken heart was mended by gentle hands, honest words, and a cowboy who proved that real love doesn't just happen in fairy tales. What started as the worst day of her life became the beginning of everything she never knew she deserved. Sarah Martinez had always believed in signs, but she never expected one to hit her like a sledgehammer to the chest on a Tuesday afternoon in October. She was running late picking up her daughter Emma from dance class, cursing herself for losing track of time while grocery shopping. As she pulled into the parking lot of Rosie's Diner, the place where she and David had shared their first official date 13 years ago, she spotted his familiar blue pickup truck. Her heart did a little skip of joy. Maybe they could grab coffee together, maybe surprise Emma with ice cream afterward. These small moments had become precious to her lately, especially with David working such long hours at the construction company. She parked 2 spots away from his truck, already planning how she'd sneak up and surprise him through the window. But as she stepped out of her car, adjusting her purse strap and smoothing down her hair, she saw something that made her freeze completely. Through the large front window of the diner, she could see David sitting in their old booth, the one by the window where he'd nervously asked her to be his girlfriend all those years ago. He wasn't alone. A woman with long blonde hair was sitting across from him, leaning forward with her hand covering his on the table. Sarah's mind immediately went into explanation mode, the way it does when something doesn't make sense. Maybe it was a client. Maybe someone from work needed to discuss a project. David was always helping people with their home renovation dreams. Then the woman leaned even closer, and David lifted his free hand to touch her face with such tenderness that Sarah felt her knees go weak. This wasn't business. This wasn't casual. This was intimate in a way that made Sarah's stomach drop to the asphalt beneath her feet. She watched, unable to move or breathe properly, as the blonde woman smiled and said something that made David laugh. Really laugh, the way he used to laugh with Sarah before life got complicated, before bills and mortgages and the daily grind of raising a teenager wore down their spontaneous joy. When was the last time she'd made him laugh like that? The woman stood up from the booth and David rose with her. Sarah's hands were shaking now as she gripped her car keys so tightly they cut into her palm. She should leave. She should drive away and pretend this never happened. She should give him a chance to explain. Instead, she stood rooted to the spot as David walked the woman to the door of the diner. They stopped just outside, and Sarah watched her husband of 12 years, the father of her child, the man who'd promised to love her through everything, lean down and kiss another woman. Not a quick peck, not an accidental brush of lips, but a real kiss, full of passion and promise, and all the things that had been missing from their own marriage for months now. Sarah's vision blurred, and for a moment she thought she might actually faint right there in the parking lot. Her chest felt tight, like someone was squeezing all the air out of her lungs. This couldn't be happening, not to her, not to them. They had problems, sure, but every marriage had problems. They were working through things, weren't they? The blonde woman got into a red sedan parked right next to the diner's entrance, and David stood there waving as she drove away. He looked happy, Sarah realized with a sharp stab of pain. Relaxed and happy in a way she hadn't seen him in their own home for a very long time. Sarah managed to fumble her way back into her car, her hands shaking so badly she could barely get the key in the ignition. She needed to get to Emma's dance class, but she couldn't drive like this. She couldn't even think straight. Her phone buzzed with a text message, and she saw David's name on the screen. Running late from work site. Can you grab Em? Love you. Love you. The words that used to warm her heart now felt like salt in an open wound. How could he text her, love you, minutes after kissing another woman? How long had this been going on? How many times had he lied about where he was, who he was with? Sarah forced herself to take deep breaths, the way her therapist had taught her during those difficult months after her mother's death. In through the nose, hold for 4 counts, out through the mouth. She had to pull herself together for Emma. Her daughter didn't deserve to see her mother fall apart in a dance studio parking lot. She drove to the studio on autopilot, somehow managing to navigate the familiar streets while her mind raced with questions, and her heart felt like it was breaking into smaller and smaller pieces. When she arrived, Emma bounced out of the building with her usual post-dance energy, chattering about the new routine they were learning for the upcoming recital. "Mom, you look weird," Emma said as she buckled her seatbelt. "Are you sick?" Sarah glanced at her daughter in the rearview mirror. 15 years old, all legs and attitude, with David's dark eyes and her own stubborn chin. How do you tell your teenager that her father might be having an affair? How do you explain that the family she thought was solid might be built on lies? Just tired, sweetheart, Sarah managed to say. Long day. Emma accepted this explanation and went back to describing her dance routine. Something about turns and jumps that Sarah tried to focus on but couldn't quite process. All she could see was David's hand on that woman's face, the way he'd looked at her like she was something precious. When had he stopped looking at Sarah that way? They stopped at the grocery store to pick up ingredients for dinner, and Sarah moved through the aisles like she was sleepwalking. She grabbed items without really seeing them, nodding at Emma's requests for snacks, and trying to appear normal, while her world crumbled around her. Back home, their modest two-story house felt different somehow, like she was seeing it through new eyes. The family photos on the mantle, the couch where they watched movies together on Friday nights, the kitchen table where they shared meals and homework struggles and discussions about Emma's future. Had any of it been real lately, or had David been going through the motions while his heart was somewhere else? Emma disappeared upstairs to shower and start her homework, and Sarah stood alone in her kitchen, staring at the chicken she was supposed to cook for dinner. Her hands were still shaking, and she realized she couldn't remember driving home from the store. She'd been functioning on autopilot, muscle memory getting her through the basic tasks of motherhood, while her emotional world imploded. Her phone rang, and David's name appeared on the screen again. For a moment, she just stared at it, wondering if she could pretend everything was normal, if she could act like she hadn't seen anything. Maybe they could work through this. Maybe it was just a moment of weakness, a mistake he'd regret. Hey, babe. David's voice sounded tired but normal when she finally answered. Sorry about earlier. Johnson's renovation is turning into a nightmare, and we're behind schedule. I'm heading home now. Sarah closed her eyes, listening to her husband lie to her with such casual ease that she wondered how many other lies she'd believed over the past months. Had there been signs she'd missed? Late nights at work, phone calls he took in another room, new clothes he said he'd bought for work events she never heard about again? Sarah? You there? I'm here, she managed to whisper. Everything okay? You sound strange. Everything okay. Her husband was having an affair. Her marriage was apparently a fraud. And she had no idea how to tell her daughter that their family might be falling apart. But sure, everything was fine. Just tired, she said, echoing what she'd told Emma. I'll see you when you get home. She hung up before he could respond, and immediately wondered if that had sounded suspicious. Was she supposed to act normal until she figured out what to do? Was she supposed to confront him right away? She had no roadmap for this situation, no guidebook for what to do when your husband's betrayal slaps you in the face on a Tuesday afternoon. Sarah sank into one of the kitchen chairs and let herself cry for the first time since the parking lot. Quiet tears that wouldn't alert Emma upstairs, but tears that carried 12 years of marriage, 15 years of knowing David, and all the dreams she'd had for their future together. She thought about their wedding day, how young and hopeful they'd been. David had been so nervous he'd forgotten his vows and had to make them up on the spot, promising to love her through all of life's adventures and challenges. She'd believed him completely, trusted him with her whole heart. She thought about the night Emma was born, how David had cried when he first held their daughter, whispering promises about what kind of father he'd be. He'd kept those promises too. He was a good dad, involved and loving and present for all the important moments. How could a good father and a man who'd once loved her so completely be the same person who was now lying to her face and kissing other women in public places? The garage door opened, and Sarah quickly wiped her tears, moving to the stove to start dinner. She had to pretend everything was normal, at least until she figured out what normal even looked like anymore. David walked through the door with his usual end-of-day exhaustion, dropping his work boots by the entrance and kissing the top of her head as he passed. The gesture that had once felt automatic and loving now felt like another lie. Smells good in here, he said, though she hadn't actually started cooking anything yet. How was your day? Sarah wondered if this was some kind of test, if he somehow knew she'd seen him. But his face showed nothing but tired normalcy. The expression of a man who'd had a long day at work and was ready for dinner and maybe some television before bed. Fine, she said, focusing on browning the chicken, so she wouldn't have to look at him. Emma had a good day at dance. She's upstairs doing homework. They fell into their usual evening routine, and Sarah marveled at how easily she could go through the motions while her heart was breaking. Dinner conversation about Emma's upcoming recital and David's work projects, helping with math homework, watching an episode of the cooking show they'd been following together. David even reached for her hand during the show, absently stroking his thumb across her knuckles the way he'd done for years. The gesture that used to comfort her now felt like a betrayal of its own. How could he touch her so casually when he'd been touching someone else with such passion just hours earlier? When they went to bed, David fell asleep quickly, the way he always did after physical work days. Sarah lay awake listening to his breathing, studying his face in the dim light from the street lamp outside their window. He looked peaceful, younger somehow, like the stressed lines around his eyes had softened. Maybe he was dreaming about the blonde woman. Maybe he was planning when he'd see her next. Maybe he was thinking about a future that didn't include Sarah at all. Sarah must have dozed fitfully, because she woke to her alarm, feeling like she'd been hit by a truck. David was already up and getting dressed for work, humming quietly to himself. He actually seemed to be in a good mood, which somehow made everything worse. "I might be late again tonight," he said as he kissed her goodbye, another casual lie delivered with practiced ease. "This Johnson project is really demanding." After he left, Sarah sat at the kitchen table with her coffee, staring at her phone and trying to decide what to do next. She could call her sister, but Maria would immediately want to confront David, or hire a private investigator, or do something dramatic that might make the situation worse. She could call their marriage counselor, the one they'd seen a few times after her mother's death, when they'd been struggling to communicate. But Dr. Peterson would want to see both of them together, and Sarah wasn't ready for that conversation yet. Instead, she found herself Googling things like signs your husband is cheating and what to do when you catch your spouse having an affair, reading through websites and forums filled with other women's stories of betrayal and heartbreak. Some had worked through it, attending counseling and rebuilding trust over years of hard work. Others had divorced and found happiness elsewhere. All of them seemed stronger than Sarah felt right now. Emma came down for breakfast, and Sarah tried to focus on normal mum tasks. Packing lunch, checking homework, reminding her daughter about the permission slip for next week's field trip. But Emma kept giving her strange looks. "Mum, are you sure you're okay? You look like you didn't sleep." Sarah caught her reflection in the toaster and realized her daughter was right. Her eyes were puffy and red-rimmed, her hair was a mess, and she looked like exactly what she was, a woman whose world had been turned upside down. "I think I might be getting sick," she lied, adding another deception to the growing pile in their household. "I'll probably stay home today and rest." After Emma left for school and David was safely at his job site, or wherever he actually was, Sarah found herself alone with the crushing weight of knowledge she didn't know how to carry. She called in sick to her part-time job at the library, something she'd never done unless she was actually ill. She spent the day alternating between tears and numbness, between anger and devastating sadness. She looked through photo albums, trying to pinpoint when things had started to change between them. She examined old text messages looking for clues she might have missed. By the time Emma came home from school, Sarah had made a decision. She needed to know more before she decided what to do next. She needed to understand how long this had been going on, how serious it was, whether there was anything left of her marriage worth saving. She also realized something that scared her more than the affair itself. Part of her wasn't completely surprised. Things had been different between them for months, maybe longer. They'd been going through the motions of marriage without the connection that had once made them a team. Maybe David wasn't the only one who'd been pretending everything was fine when it wasn't. The next few weeks passed in a haze of careful observation and growing certainty that Sarah's marriage was over. She became a detective in her own life, noticing things that had probably been there all along, but that she'd been too trusting, too busy, or too afraid to see clearly. David's phone, which used to sit carelessly on kitchen counters and bedroom nightstands, was now always face down and within his immediate reach. He'd started taking showers as soon as he got home from work. Something about washing off construction dust, but he'd been doing construction for 12 years without this sudden obsession with cleanliness. There were new songs on his playlist, romantic ones that he'd never shared with Sarah, new cologne that he said was a free sample from somewhere, a haircut that was more stylish than his usual practical trim, done at a salon instead of the barbershop he'd been going to for years. Each small change was like a paper cut, individually manageable, but collectively creating a wound that wouldn't stop bleeding. Sarah tried to act normal, but Emma was beginning to notice the tension in the house. Their daughter started spending more time at friends' houses, claiming she had group projects and study sessions that seemed to multiply as the weeks went on. Sarah suspected Emma could sense the storm brewing in their family, even if she didn't understand what was causing it. The worst part was how kind David had become. Not loving exactly, but considerate in a way that felt like guilt management. He brought home flowers for no reason, helped with household chores without being asked, and was more patient with both Sarah and Emma than he'd been in months. Sarah recognized this behavior from articles she'd been reading obsessively late at night. The guilty spouse often becomes more attentive at home, trying to balance the scales of their betrayal with extra kindness. It felt manipulative, even if David didn't consciously mean it that way. 3 weeks after that devastating Tuesday afternoon, Sarah made another discovery that confirmed her worst fears. David had left his work jacket hanging in the garage, and when she went to move it to the laundry room, a restaurant receipt fell from the pocket. Chez Laurent, an expensive French restaurant downtown. Dinner for two, including a bottle of wine that cost more than their usual monthly date night budget. The date was from the previous weekend, when David had told Sarah he was working overtime on an emergency repair job. Sarah stared at the receipt until the numbers blurred, trying to imagine her husband at a candle-lit table with another woman, sharing expensive wine and intimate conversation, while Sarah had spent that Saturday evening alone, watching Netflix and wondering why their marriage felt so empty lately.
She took a picture of the receipt with her phone before putting it back in his jacket pocket.
She wasn't sure why she was collecting evidence, but some instinct told her she might need proof of what was happening. That night, lying next to David while he slept peacefully, Sarah made a decision that surprised her. She wasn't ready to confront him yet, but she was ready to start thinking about what life might look like without him. For the first time since that day in the parking lot, she let herself imagine being single again. The thought was terrifying but also strangely liberating. When was the last time she'd made a decision based purely on what she wanted, without considering how it would affect David's schedule or preferences? She started small. On Thursday, instead of going straight home after her shift at the library, she stopped at a coffee shop she'd never been to before and sat alone with a book for an hour. It felt wonderfully selfish and slightly rebellious, like playing hooky from her own life. Barista, a young woman with bright pink hair and kind eyes, struck up a conversation about the novel Sarah was reading. For 30 minutes, Sarah talked to a stranger about books and life and dreams that had nothing to do with being a wife or mother. She was just Sarah, a woman with opinions about literature and thoughts about the world. Walking back to her car, she realized she felt lighter than she had in weeks. Not happy exactly, but more like herself than she'd felt in months of pretending everything was fine in her marriage. That evening, David announced he'd be working late again on Friday. Sarah nodded and said she might take Emma to see a movie, something they hadn't done in ages. David seemed relieved that she had plans, which stung more than if he'd been disappointed. Friday night at the movies, watching a romantic comedy with her daughter Sarah, found herself crying during a scene where the female lead stood up for herself and walked away from a relationship that wasn't serving her. Emma noticed and offered her popcorn, assuming her mother was just emotional about the movie. "Mum, you've been weird lately," Emma said as they drove home. "Like, sad, weird. Is everything okay with you and Dad?" Sarah's hands tightened on the steering wheel. Her daughter was 15, old enough to sense problems but young enough to hope her parents could fix anything. How much honesty was appropriate, how much protection was necessary? "Dad and I are going through some challenges right now," Sarah said carefully. "But that doesn't change how much we both love you, okay? Whatever happens between your father and me, that part will never change." Emma was quiet for several blocks. "Are you guys getting divorced?" The word hung in the air between them, heavy with possibility and fear. Sarah had been thinking it for weeks but hadn't let herself say it out loud. "I don't know, sweetheart. I hope we can work things out, but sometimes adults have problems that are hard to fix. Like Grandma and Grandpa did, Sarah's parents had divorced when she was 26, after years of growing apart and trying to pretend they were happy. Sarah had sworn she'd never put her own children through that, but here she was, possibly facing the same situation. "Yeah, kind of like that." Emma nodded, processing this information with the matter-of-fact acceptance that teenagers sometimes show in crisis situations. "Well, if you do get divorced, I want to live with you during the week and Dad on weekends. Is that okay?" Sarah's heart broke and swelled simultaneously. Her daughter was already trying to take care of everyone, trying to make sure no one got hurt by her choice of loyalty. "Let's not worry about that right now, okay? But thank you for telling me what you'd want. That's important for me to know." When they got home, David's truck was in the driveway, which surprised Sarah. He wasn't supposed to be back from his fictitious work emergency until much later. Inside, she found him in the kitchen, making himself a sandwich and looking slightly guilty about something. "How was the movie?" he asked, too quickly and with too much enthusiasm. "Good. How was work?" "You're home earlier than expected." "Oh, we finished up sooner than planned. Johnson's crew was more efficient today." Sarah nodded, filing away another lie in her mental collection. She was becoming an expert at reading the small signs of David's deception. The way his eyes shifted left when he made up details, how he over-explained situations that should have been straightforward. Later, after Emma had gone to bed, Sarah sat at her computer and did something that felt both necessary and terrifying. She started researching divorce lawyers in their area, reading reviews and checking credentials, like she was shopping for any other professional service. The websites all used words like compassionate and experienced and protecting your interests, language that assumed conflict and division, and the end of everything she'd thought was permanent in her life. She also looked up information about single parenting, about dividing assets, about how to tell children about divorce in a way that minimized trauma. She researched rental properties in good school districts and tried to calculate what her budget would look like on just her part-time library salary. The numbers were sobering. Even if David paid child support and alimony, Sarah's standard of living would drop significantly. She'd probably have to find full-time work, maybe go back to school to improve her earning potential. Emma would face changes in her daily life, possibly including a smaller house in a different neighborhood. But as Sarah sat there planning for a future she'd never wanted, she realized something important. She could do this. It would be hard, but she was capable of building a life for herself and Emma that was based on honesty and authenticity instead of pretense and slow-growing resentment. For the first time since that devastating Tuesday, Sarah felt something other than sadness and anger. She felt a tiny spark of determination, a whisper of strength that reminded her who she'd been before she became half of a couple that was slowly destroying each other through indifference and betrayal. The next morning was Saturday, and David announced he had to go check on a job site. Sarah didn't bother asking which one or when he'd be back. Instead, she called her sister Maria and asked if she wanted to meet for coffee. Maria, older by 3 years and blessed with the family talent for reading people's emotions, took one look at Sarah's face and ordered them a quiet corner table at the back of the coffee shop. "Okay, what's going on?"
"You look like you haven't slept in weeks." Sarah had been planning to ease into the conversation, maybe start with general complaints about marriage being difficult.
Instead, she found herself saying, "I think David is having an affair." Maria's coffee cup stopped halfway to her mouth.
"What? Are you sure?" Sarah told her sister about the parking lot scene, about the lies in the restaurant receipt, and all the small changes that added up to a picture of betrayal. Maria listened without interrupting, her face growing darker with anger as the story continued. "That bastard," Maria said when Sarah finished. "Do you know who she is?" "No, and I'm not sure I want to know. It might make everything more real somehow." "It's already real, Sarah. The question is what you're going to do about it." They sat in silence for several minutes, watching other people in the coffee shop going about their normal Saturday morning routines. Sarah envied them their ordinary problems, their uncomplicated relationships, their certainty about where they'd be sleeping that night.
"Do you think I should confront him?" Sarah asked finally.
"Do you think there's any point? I mean, what's he going to say? Either he'll lie and deny it, or he'll admit it and then what? Are you prepared to try to work through this?" Sarah considered the question seriously. A month ago, she might have said yes immediately, committed to fighting for her marriage no matter what it took. Now, after weeks of watching David lie to her face and feeling like a stranger in her own home, she wasn't sure there was anything left worth fighting for.
"I keep thinking about how relieved he seemed when I said Emma and I were going to the movies last night."
Like he was happy to have us out of the house. When did I become an inconvenience in my own marriage? Maria reached across the table and squeezed Sarah's hand. "You're not an inconvenience. You're a good woman who deserves better than this. Whatever you decide to do, I'll support you. Emma too. You both deserve to be with people who choose you every day, not people who are looking for reasons to be somewhere else." Driving home from coffee with her sister, Sarah felt a shift happening inside her. The devastation and shock were giving way to something calmer but more resolute. She was tired of being lied to, tired of pretending everything was fine, tired of living in a marriage that had become a performance for their daughter's benefit. She thought about the young woman she'd been when she first met David, full of dreams and confidence and certainty about what she wanted from life. Somewhere along the way, she'd lost track of that person, had become so focused on being a good wife and mother that she'd forgotten how to be authentically herself. Maybe David's affair was devastating, but maybe it was also an opportunity to remember who Sarah Martinez was when she wasn't trying to hold together a relationship that had been slowly dying for months. That afternoon, while David was at his mysterious job site and Emma was at a friend's house, Sarah did something she hadn't done in years. She sat down with a notebook and made a list of things that made her happy, things she wanted to do, dreams she'd put aside for the sake of family stability. The list started small, things like reading more books and taking photography classes and traveling to places she'd only seen in magazines. But, as she wrote, the dreams got bigger and more ambitious. Maybe she could go back to school and finish the English degree she'd abandoned when Emma was born. Maybe she could write the novel she'd been thinking about for years. Maybe she could move somewhere new and start fresh, build a life based on her own choices instead of circumstances that had gradually trapped her. For the first time in weeks, Sarah felt something that might have been excitement mixed in with all the fear and sadness. The end of her marriage would be devastating, but it might also be the beginning of something she couldn't even imagine yet. When David came home that evening, he found Sarah cooking dinner and humming to herself, something she hadn't done in months. He looked surprised, maybe even suspicious, as if her improved mood was somehow threatening to whatever story he'd been telling himself about their relationship.
"You seem happy," he said, and there was something in his tone that made Sarah look at him more carefully.
"I had a good day," she said simply. "Coffee with Maria, some time to think." "About what?" Sarah met his eyes directly, and for a moment she considered telling him the truth right then and there. But something held her back, some instinct that she needed to be more prepared before having that conversation. "Just life," she said. "The future." David nodded and went upstairs to shower, and Sarah continued making dinner while planning the most important conversation of her marriage. The confrontation came on a rainy Thursday evening in November, and it wasn't planned by either of them. Emma was at her friend Ashley's house for a sleepover, and David had just gotten home from another one of his mysterious late nights. He walked into the kitchen while Sarah was cleaning up from dinner, and something about his demeanor was different, guilty, but also resigned, like a man who was tired of carrying a secret. Sarah was drying dishes when David's phone buzzed on the counter between them. The screen lit up with a text message from someone named Melissa. "Can't wait to see you tomorrow night. I love you." They both stared at the phone for a heartbeat that stretched into eternity. Sarah felt strangely calm, like she'd been holding her breath for weeks and could finally exhale. David looked like he might be sick. "Sarah?" he started. But she held up her hand. "Don't," she said quietly. "Please don't lie to me anymore. I can't handle any more lies." David sank into one of the kitchen chairs, suddenly looking older than his 34 years. "How long have you known? I saw you at Rosie's diner about 6 weeks ago. With her." He flinched like she'd hit him. "You saw us?" "I saw you kiss her. I saw the way you looked at her." Sarah's voice was steady, which surprised her. She'd expected this conversation to involve screaming or crying, but instead she felt empty, hollowed out. "How long has this been going on?" David ran his hands through his hair, a gesture she'd once found endearing but now recognized as his tell when he was about to say something difficult. "About 4 months," he said finally. "Maybe a little longer. 4 months, 1/3 of a year." Sarah tried to calculate how many lies he'd told in that time, how many nights he'd come home from being with another woman and kiss Sarah goodnight like nothing had changed. "Do you love her?" The question hung between them like a bridge that once crossed, couldn't be uncrossed. David met her eyes for the first time since his phone had lit up with another woman's declaration of love. "Yes," he whispered. "I'm sorry, Sarah, but yes." Sarah nodded, surprised by how much that simple word could hurt even when she'd been expecting it. "And us? Do you love me at all anymore?" David was quiet for so long that Sarah thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was thick with tears. "I love who you used to be. I love the mother you are to Emma. I love our history together, but I'm not in love with you anymore, and I haven't been for a long time." There it was. The truth that had been lurking beneath months of polite distance and careful conversations. Sarah felt something break inside her chest, but it wasn't entirely painful. Part of it felt like relief. "When did we stop being in love?" she asked, sitting down across from him at the table where they'd shared thousands of meals and conversations over the years. "I don't know. It was gradual, I think. After your mom died, you were grieving for so long, and I felt like I couldn't help you. We started living parallel lives instead of a shared one. I was lonely, and then I met Melissa at a coffee shop, and she made me remember what it felt like to be interesting to someone."
Sarah understood what he meant, even though it hurt.
After her mother's death 2 years ago, she had retreated into herself for months. David had tried to be supportive, But eventually his attempts to comfort her had felt intrusive, and her grief had become a wall between them. "You could have talked to me about feeling lonely," she said. "We could have gone to counseling, tried to fix things. Would you have wanted to fix things? Really? Or would you have just gone through the motions because it was the right thing to do?" The question was like a slap, partly because Sarah wasn't sure of the answer. Had she been holding on to their marriage out of love, or out of habit and fear of change? "I guess we'll never know," she said. They talked for another hour, and it was the most honest conversation they'd had in years. David told her about Melissa, how they'd met and fallen in love, how guilty he felt about lying, but how alive he felt when he was with her. Sarah found herself able to listen without hatred, maybe because she'd been expecting this moment for so long. In return, she told him about how invisible she'd felt in their marriage lately, how she'd been going through the motions of being his wife without feeling any real connection to him. She told him about the relief she'd felt when she'd started imagining life without him, how she'd been planning to leave even before she knew about his affair. "So what do we do now?" David asked as the kitchen clock ticked past midnight. "I think you should move out," Sarah said. "We'll figure out the divorce details later, but Emma and I need some time to adjust to this." David nodded, looking relieved that she wasn't going to fight him or try to force him to choose. "I'll get a place this weekend. We'll need to tell Emma." "Together," Sarah said. "This weekend, after you've moved your things. She deserves to hear it from both of us." 3 days later, Sarah found herself alone in the house that had been her home for 8 years, surrounded by the gaps where David's belongings used to be. His guitar was gone from the living room corner. His books had been cleared from the bedroom shelves, and half the closet space stood empty, like a mouth missing teeth. Emma had taken the news better than either of them had expected, asking practical questions about living arrangements and school, and whether she'd still get to see both parents regularly. She'd cried, but not as much as Sarah had feared, and she'd hugged them both before disappearing into her room to process this information in whatever way teenagers process the end of their parents' marriage.
Now Sarah stood in her kitchen making coffee for one and trying to figure out what came next.
The divorce lawyer consultation was scheduled for the following week. Emma would be spending weekends with David at his new apartment. Sarah would be learning how to be single again after 17 years of being part of a couple. She was scared, but she was also curious about who she might become now that she wasn't trying to be the perfect wife to a man who didn't want her anymore. The opportunity to find out came sooner than she'd expected, in the form of a flat tire on a country road she'd never driven before. Sarah had decided to take a different route home from the grocery store, partly because she was tired of passing all the familiar places that reminded her of her former life. The back roads through ranch country were longer but prettier, with rolling hills and old farmhouses that looked like they belonged in a different century. She was admiring a particularly beautiful property, with a white fence and horses grazing in a pasture, when she heard the distinctive thump-thump-thump of a failing tire. By the time she found a safe place to pull over, the front passenger tire was completely flat. Sarah sat in her car for a moment, fighting back tears of frustration. She knew how to change a tire in theory, but she'd never actually done it alone. David had always been the one to handle car problems, and now she was stranded on a deserted road with no husband to call for help. She was fumbling with her phone, trying to decide between calling a tow truck or her sister, when she heard the sound of an approaching vehicle. Through her rearview mirror, she saw an old red pickup truck slowing down behind her. Sarah's first instinct was wariness. She was a woman alone on an empty road, vulnerable in exactly the way women are taught to fear. But as the truck pulled up behind her and the driver got out, her anxiety shifted to something else entirely. The man walking toward her car was tall and lean, wearing faded jeans and work boots, and a cowboy hat that looked like it had seen years of honest use. He moved with an easy confidence that spoke of someone comfortable in his own skin. And when he got close enough for her to see his face clearly, Sarah felt her breath catch. He was probably in his late 30s, with dark hair showing beneath the brim of his hat, and eyes so green they were almost startling. His face was weathered in a way that suggested time spent outdoors, and when he smiled as he approached her window, Sarah felt something flutter in her chest that she hadn't felt in years. "Looks like you're having some car trouble," he said as Sarah rolled down her window. His voice had a slight Texas drawl that somehow made everything he said sound more important. "Flat tire," Sarah said, grateful that her voice sounded steadier than she felt. "I was just trying to decide who to call." "No need to call anyone if you don't mind letting me take a look. I'm pretty handy with cars, and it's no trouble at all." Something about his manner put Sarah at ease. He wasn't pushy or overly familiar. just genuinely helpful in a way that seemed natural to him. "That would be amazing, thank you. I'm Sarah, by the way." "Jake Sullivan," he said, touching the brim of his hat in a gesture that belonged to an earlier century. "Let me grab some tools from my truck, and we'll have you back on the road in no time." Sarah got out of her car to watch Jake work and found herself studying him with an attention to detail that surprised her. His movements were economical and confident as he positioned the jack and loosened the lug nuts. His hands were strong and capable, with calluses that spoke of real work rather than gym workouts. "You live around here?" he asked as he worked, not looking up from the tire, but making conversation to put her at ease. "About 20 minutes away in town. I was just taking the scenic route home. I've never been down this road before. It's a pretty drive. I live just up ahead, actually. Got a small ranch with my brother. We raise horses mostly, some cattle. It's beautiful out here, so peaceful." Jake glanced up at her then, and Sarah felt the full impact of those green eyes focused on her face. Peaceful is right. Sometimes I go days without seeing anyone except my brother and the animals. It's a good life, but it can get a little quiet. There was something in his tone that made Sarah wonder if he was as lonely as she had been. The thought created an unexpected connection between them, two people who understood what it felt like to be isolated in different ways. "There you go," Jake said, standing up and brushing dirt off his hands. "Good as new. You might want to get that spare replaced soon, though. It's older than it should be for regular use." "Thank you so much," Sarah said, meaning it more than she'd meant anything in weeks. "I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't stopped."
Anyone would have stopped, Jake said. But Sarah doubted that was true.
In her experience, people were usually too busy or too cautious to help strangers on empty roads. "Can I at least pay you for your time, or buy you dinner or something?" The offer came out before Sarah had consciously decided to make it, and she felt her cheeks flush with embarrassment. Here was this kind man who'd helped her out of a jam, and she was probably making him uncomfortable by suggesting something that sounded almost like a date. But Jake's smile widened in a way that reached his eyes and made him look younger. "I don't need any payment, but I wouldn't say no to dinner if you're serious about the offer. There's not much in the way of fine dining out here, but there's a little place in town that makes a decent steak." Sarah felt her heart skip in a way that had nothing to do with anxiety and everything to do with possibility. "I know exactly the place you mean. Murphy's, right? I love their steak." "Murphy's it is. How about Friday night, 7 o'clock? "That sounds perfect." Jake touched his hat again in that old-fashioned gesture that was somehow incredibly appealing. "I'll see you Friday then, Sarah. Drive safe." Sarah watched him walk back to his truck, admiring the easy way he moved and trying to process what had just happened. In the space of 30 minutes, a stranger had fixed her tire and asked her to dinner, and she'd said yes without a moment's hesitation. As she drove home, Sarah found herself smiling for the first time in weeks. She wasn't sure if dinner with Jake was a date or just a friendly meal between two people who'd met under unusual circumstances, but either way, she was looking forward to it more than she'd looked forward to anything in months. For the first time since her marriage had ended, Sarah felt like herself again. Not David's wife or Emma's mother, but just Sarah. A woman who could have dinner with an interesting man and see what happened next. That evening, she called Maria to tell her about the flat tire and the cowboy who'd rescued her. "Wait, let me get this straight," Maria said, laughing. "You've been separated for less than a week, and you already have a date with a mysterious rancher? This is like something out of a romance novel." "It's not a date," Sarah protested, though she wasn't entirely convinced of that herself. "It's just dinner. He was incredibly kind, and I want to thank him properly." "Aha. And what does this incredibly kind rancher look like?" Sarah found herself describing Jake's green eyes and confident smile, the way he'd moved with such easy competence, the old-fashioned courtesy that had somehow felt more genuine than any modern gesture. "Oh, it's definitely a date," Maria said with satisfaction, "and good for you. You deserve to remember what it feels like to be appreciated by a man who actually wants to spend time with you." That night, as Sarah lay in bed in the house that felt too big and too quiet without David's presence, she thought about Jake's smile and the way he'd looked at her like she was worth paying attention to. She thought about Friday night and wondered what they'd talk about over dinner, what she might learn about this man who'd appeared in her life at exactly the moment she needed to be reminded that there were still good people in the world. For the first time since her marriage had ended, Sarah fell asleep thinking about the future instead of mourning the past. Friday evening arrived with unseasonable warmth for November, and Sarah found herself standing in front of her bedroom mirror, trying on her third outfit of the evening. She'd started with something casual, then switched to something too formal for Murphy's Steakhouse, and finally settled on dark jeans and a soft blue sweater that brought out her eyes. It had been so long since she'd dressed for a man's attention that she'd almost forgotten how to do it. During the last years of her marriage, she'd chosen clothes for comfort and practicality, not for how they made her look or feel. Tonight, she wanted to feel attractive, wanted to remember what it was like to be a woman getting ready for an evening with someone who might actually notice her efforts. Sarah arrived at Murphy's 10 minutes early, nervous energy making it impossible to wait at home any longer. The restaurant was exactly what she'd expected based on Jake's description. A local institution with red vinyl booths, country music playing softly in the background, and the smell of grilled meat that made her mouth water despite her anxiety. She was checking her phone for the third time when Jake walked through the door, and Sarah's breath caught exactly the way it had on the side of that country road. He traded his work clothes for clean jeans and a white button-down shirt that emphasized his broad shoulders, but he still wore the cowboy hat and boots that seemed as natural to him as breathing. When he spotted her in the corner booth she'd chosen, his face lit up with a smile that was purely for her, and Sarah felt something warm unfold in her chest. "Sorry I'm a couple minutes late," he said, sliding into the seat across from her. "Had a mare who decided tonight was the perfect time to get herself tangled in a fence. Is she okay?"
She's fine.
More embarrassed than hurt, I think. Sometimes I swear horses do things just to get attention. Jake's easy manner helped Sarah relax, and soon they were talking as comfortably as if they'd known each other for years instead of days. He told her about the ranch he shared with his younger brother Mark, about the horses they bred and trained, about the satisfaction of working with animals that responded to patience and consistency rather than force. "It's not the most profitable way to make a living," Jake admitted over their steaks, "but it's honest work, and I can't imagine doing anything else. My dad started the ranch when I was in high school, and when he passed 5 years ago, Mark and I just kept going with what he'd taught us." "It sounds like a good life," Sarah said, and meant it. There was something appealing about work that connected you to the land and the animals, that followed natural rhythms instead of office schedules and corporate demands. "What about you? What do you do when you're not getting rescued on country roads?" Sarah laughed, surprised by how easy it was to laugh with him. "I work part-time at the library in town, but that's probably going to change soon. I'm going through a divorce, and I'll need to figure out something more full-time to support myself and my daughter." She watched Jake's face carefully as she mentioned her divorce, unsure how this information would affect their evening. Some men were intimidated by recently separated women, worried about being rebound relationships, or getting caught up in complicated situations. But Jake just nodded thoughtfully. "That must be a difficult transition. How old is your daughter?" 15. "She's handling everything better than I expected, actually. Teenagers are more resilient than we give them credit for sometimes. My ex-wife and I didn't have kids," Jake said, and Sarah felt a small jolt of surprise. He'd been married before too. Probably for the best, considering how things ended up. She decided ranch life wasn't exciting enough for her, wanted to move to Dallas and try something different. We wanted different things from life, and eventually we couldn't pretend that didn't matter anymore. There was pain in his voice, but it was the old kind of pain, processed and accepted rather than raw and bleeding. Sarah recognized it because she was beginning to feel the same way about her own marriage. "How long have you been divorced?" 3 years now. Took me a while to feel ready to date again, if I'm being honest. Ranch life can make you pretty set in your ways, and I wasn't sure I wanted to risk getting hurt again." Jake met her eyes across the table, and Sarah felt the weight of what he wasn't saying. He was taking a risk by being here with her, just like she was taking a risk by being here with him. Two people who'd been hurt by love, cautiously opening themselves to the possibility that it might be worth trying again. "Can I ask what made you decide to take that scenic route home?" Jake asked. "The day we met, I mean. You said you'd never driven that road before." Sarah considered how much truth to share. She could give him a simple answer about wanting to see new places, or she could tell him about the devastating loneliness she'd been feeling, about how she'd been avoiding familiar places because they reminded her of the life that was ending. Something about Jake's steady presence made her choose honesty. "I was trying to avoid places that reminded me of my marriage," she said. "My husband and I used to go to the coffee shop near the grocery store sometimes, and I just couldn't face driving past it that day. The country road felt like neutral territory, somewhere that belonged just to me." Jake nodded as if this made perfect sense to him. "After my divorce, I avoided town for months. Couldn't handle running into people who wanted to know how I was doing, if I was okay, whether I thought Lisa and I might work things out. Sometimes you need space that doesn't have any history attached to it." "Exactly. Though I'm glad I took that detour, considering how it worked out. Even if it meant getting a flat tire. Especially because it meant getting a flat tire. Otherwise, I never would have met you." The admission hung between them, honest and a little vulnerable. Sarah wasn't usually so direct about her feelings, but something about Jake brought out a boldness in her that had been dormant for years. "I'm glad you got that flat tire too," Jake said softly. "Though I have to admit, I don't usually stop for strangers on the road." "What made you stop for me, Jake?" Was quiet for a moment, turning his coffee cup in slow circles on the table. "You looked lost," he said finally. "Not just because of the tire, but really lost, like you didn't know where you belonged." I recognized the feeling. Sarah felt tears prick at her eyes because he was right. She had felt lost that day, adrift in a life that no longer fit her, uncertain about who she was supposed to be now that she wasn't David's wife anymore. "Did you find your way?" she asked. "After your divorce, I mean. Did you figure out where you belonged?" "I'm working on it. Some days are better than others.
But sitting here with you tonight, I feel more like myself than I have in a long time." The honesty in his voice made Sarah's chest tighten with something that might have been hope.
When was the last time someone had made her feel like she was enough exactly as she was? When had anyone last looked at her the way Jake was looking at her right now, like she was interesting and valuable and worth his complete attention? They lingered over coffee long after they'd finished eating, talking about books and travel dreams and the small things that revealed who people really were beneath the surface. Jake was well-read despite his rural lifestyle, thoughtful about the world beyond his ranch, curious about Sarah's experiences and opinions in a way that David had stopped being years ago. When the restaurant started putting chairs up on tables around them, they realized they'd been talking for over 3 hours. "I should probably let you get home," Jake said, though he didn't sound like he wanted the evening to end any more than Sarah did. Outside in the parking lot, they stood beside Sarah's car in the kind of awkward moment that happens at the end of first dates when no one's sure what the appropriate goodbye looks like. "I had a really wonderful time tonight," Sarah said, keys in hand but making no move to get in her car. "So did I. Would you like to do this again sometime? Maybe I could cook for you at the ranch? I make a decent barbecue, and it might be nice to show you the horses." Sarah felt her heart skip at the invitation. Dinner at his place felt more intimate than meeting at a restaurant, more like a real date than a friendly meal between two people who'd helped each other out. "I'd love that." "When?" "How about next Saturday? Emma's welcome too, if she'd like to come." Most kids enjoy meeting the horses. The fact that he was thinking about Emma, including her in the invitation without being asked, made Sarah like him even more. David had always acted like Emma was Sarah's responsibility rather than their shared joy. Jake was already showing more consideration for her daughter than her own father had in months. "I'll ask her. She loves animals, so she'd probably enjoy that." They stood there for another moment, neither quite ready to break the spell of the evening. Finally, Jake stepped closer and very gently kissed Sarah's cheek, a gesture that was somehow more romantic than anything more aggressive would have been. "Drive safe," he said, exactly what he'd said the day they met. "I'll call you tomorrow to firm up the details." Sarah drove home with Jake's scent still lingering on her skin, a mixture of outdoors and something clean and masculine that made her want to turn around and drive straight back to him. She felt like a teenager with her first crush, giddy and nervous and full of possibility. At home, she found Emma curled up on the couch watching a movie, and her daughter immediately noticed her mood. "Mom, you look different." Happy different. Sarah sank down beside Emma, still floating on the euphoria of a perfect evening. "I had dinner with the man who helped me with the flat tire. His name is Jake, and he invited us both to come see his horse ranch next weekend." Emma perked up immediately. "Really? What kind of horses does he have? Can I ride them? Is he nice? Do you like him?" The rapid-fire questions made Sarah laugh. "Yes, he's very nice. I don't know about riding yet, but we can ask. And yes, I like him. I like him quite a bit, actually." "Good," Emma said with the matter-of-fact wisdom of teenagers. "You deserve someone who makes you smile like that." "Dad never made you smile like that, even before everything got weird between you guys." Sarah's heart clenched at her daughter's observation. Emma had been watching the slow deterioration of her parents' marriage more closely than either Sarah or David had realized. "Are you okay with me dating someone new? I know this is all happening pretty fast." Emma considered the question seriously. "I think it's good that you're getting out and meeting people. Jake sounds better than Dad already, just because he stopped to help you when you needed it. Dad would have driven right past a stranger with a flat tire." This was probably true, and Sarah felt a pang of sadness for all the ways her marriage had slowly eroded both of their expectations about kindness and consideration. That night, Sarah lay in bed replaying every moment of the evening. From Jake's smile when he walked into the restaurant to the gentle kiss on her cheek in the parking lot. She felt like she was discovering parts of herself that had been dormant for years, remembering what it felt like to be pursued and appreciated and genuinely enjoyed by someone. She thought about next Saturday, about seeing Jake in his own environment, meeting his horses, and learning more about the life he'd built for himself. She thought about Emma coming with her, about her daughter seeing what it looked like when a man treated Sarah with respect and genuine interest. For the first time since her separation, Sarah felt excited about the future instead of afraid of it. Jake's attention was helping her remember who she was beneath all the roles she'd been playing, who she might become now that she was free to make choices based on her own desires rather than someone else's expectations. She fell asleep thinking about green eyes and gentle hands, and the possibility that sometimes the worst things that happened to you could lead directly to the best things, if you were brave enough to stay open to whatever came next. The next morning brought a text from Jake that made her smile before she was fully awake. "Thank you for a perfect evening. Looking forward to Saturday already. Hope you have a wonderful week." Sarah read the message 3 times, savoring the straightforward warmth of it. No games, no mixed signals, just honest appreciation and anticipation for their next meeting. After years of trying to decode David's increasingly distant communications, Jake's directness felt like a gift. She was still smiling when Emma came down for breakfast, and her daughter noticed immediately. "He already texted you, didn't he? You have that same look you had last night. He's just confirming our plans for Saturday. See? Dad never confirmed plans. He just expected you to remember everything and be ready when he decided to show up." Emma's observations about the differences between Jake and David were becoming uncomfortably accurate, and Sarah realized her daughter had been paying attention to relationship dynamics more than she'd given her credit for. Maybe this new chapter in their lives would be good for Emma too. A chance to see what healthy relationships looked like, how men and women could treat each other with kindness and consideration instead of taking each other for granted. As Sarah got ready for work that Monday morning, she felt lighter than she had in months. The future was uncertain, and there would be challenges ahead with the divorce and learning to be single again. But for the first time in years, she was genuinely excited about what might come next. And it all started with a flat tire and a cowboy who stopped to help. Saturday afternoon found Sarah and Emma driving down the same country road where Sarah's life had changed direction 2 weeks earlier. This time, instead of anxiety about a flat tire, Sarah felt butterflies of anticipation as they approached the turnoff Jake had described in his directions. The Sullivan Ranch was exactly what Sarah had imagined. A sprawling property with white fences, rolling pastures dotted with horses, and a 2-story farmhouse that looked like it had been built to last for generations. Jake's red pickup was parked near a large red barn, and as they pulled up the gravel driveway, Sarah saw him emerge from the barn with another man, who could only be his brother. "Wow, Mum," Emma said, pressing her face to the car window. "This place is amazing. Look at all those horses." Jake approached their car with that easy smile Sarah was already becoming addicted to, dressed in jeans and a dark green shirt that made his eyes look even more striking. Behind him, his brother Mark was clearly curious about the visitors, but hanging back to let Jake handle the introductions. "Welcome to Sullivan Ranch," Jake said as Sarah and Emma got out of the car. "Emma, I presume? I'm Jake, and I'm very glad you could come with your mum today." Emma, who could be shy with new adults, immediately warmed to Jake's straightforward manner. "Thank you for inviting us. Can we really see the horses up close?" "That's exactly what we're going to do. But first, let me introduce you to my brother Mark. He's the one who actually knows what he's doing with the horses." Mark Sullivan turned out to be a younger, slightly more serious version of Jake, with the same green eyes and easy confidence around animals. He shook hands with both Sarah and Emma with old-fashioned courtesy, then immediately launched into an explanation of the different horses in the nearest pasture.
That big bay over there is Thunder. He's our lead stallion.
The mare next to him is Starlight, and she just had a foal last month. The little one is called Comet, and he's about as mischievous as his name suggests. Emma was transfixed, asking questions about the horses' personalities and care requirements while Mark patiently answered every one. Sarah found herself watching Jake watch her daughter, noting how he seemed genuinely interested in Emma's excitement rather than just politely tolerating a teenager's presence. "Your daughter's got good instincts," Jake said quietly to Sarah as they followed Mark and Emma toward the pasture fence. "Mark doesn't usually warm up to people this quickly, but he can tell she really cares about the animals." They spent the next hour touring the ranch, meeting horses with names like Midnight and Duchess and Lightning, learning about the training programs Jake and Mark ran for both horses and riders. Emma was in heaven, especially when Mark offered to let her help groom one of the gentler mares. Sarah found herself falling in love not just with the peaceful beauty of the ranch, but with the life Jake had built here. Everything was well maintained, but not pretentious, functional but beautiful, clearly the result of hard work and genuine care rather than trying to impress anyone.
"This is incredible," she told Jake as they sat on the porch steps watching Emma brush a patient old man named Honey. "How long did it take you to build all this?"
My dad started with just the house and a few acres when I was 15.
Mark and I have been adding to it bit by bit ever since. It's not fancy, but it's ours.
There was pride in his voice, but also contentment, like a man who'd found exactly where he belonged in the world. Sarah envied that certainty, that sense of home and purpose that seemed to radiate from everything around them.
"It's not about fancy," Sarah said. "It's about belonging somewhere. You can feel it in the air here, how everything fits together." Jake looked at her with such warmth that Sarah felt her cheeks heat up. "I was hoping you'd feel that way." "This place is important to me, and I wanted to share it with you." They were interrupted by Emma's excited voice calling from the barn. "Mom? Jake, come see this."
"Honey is trying to eat my hair." The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of laughter and discovery. Emma proved to be a natural around the horses, fearless but respectful, and Mark offered to teach her basic riding skills if she was interested in coming back regularly.
Jake grilled steaks and corn on a barbecue pit behind the house while Sarah helped him prepare a salad, the two of them moving around each other in the outdoor kitchen like they'd been cooking together for years. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange that reflected off the horse pond, the four of them sat on the porch, sharing stories and watching the animals settle in for the night. Sarah couldn't remember the last time she'd felt so relaxed, so completely present in a moment, instead of worrying about what came next. "I should probably get Emma home," she said reluctantly as the first stars appeared. "School night and all that." "Of course," Jake said. But Sarah could tell he didn't want the evening to end any more than she did. "Mark, would you mind showing Emma the new foal one more time while I walk Sarah to her car?" Mark immediately offered to give Emma a closer look at baby Comet, and Sarah found herself alone with Jake for the first time all day. "Thank you for today," she said as they walked slowly toward her car. "Emma had the time of her life, and so did I. Thank you for bringing her. I was nervous about meeting your daughter. Wanted to make a good impression." "Why were you nervous?" Jake stopped walking and turned to face her, his expression serious in the dim light from the porch. "Because she's important to you, which makes her important to me. And because I'm hoping this isn't just a few casual dates, Sarah. I'm hoping we're building something real here." Sarah's heart did that skipping thing again, but this time it was mixed with a flutter of fear. Real meant vulnerable. Real meant risking the kind of heartbreak she'd just barely survived with David. "I'm hoping that too," she admitted. "But I'm scared. My track record with real isn't exactly stellar lately." "Mine either," Jake said gently. "But maybe that's why we can make this work. We both know what it feels like when it's wrong, so we'll recognize it when it's right." He reached out and took her hand, his calloused fingers intertwining with hers in a gesture that felt both intimate and completely natural. "I'd like to see you again soon," he said. "Not in a week, not next weekend. Maybe Wednesday. I could drive into town, take you to dinner somewhere nice." "I'd love that." Jake stepped closer then, close enough that Sarah could smell his cologne mixed with the scent of horses and fresh air that seemed to cling to him. This time, when he leaned down to kiss her, it wasn't on the cheek. The kiss was gentle but sure, warm and sweet, and full of promise. Sarah felt something inside her chest unfold like a flower blooming, all the careful walls she'd built around her heart cracking open to let in the possibility of love again. When they broke apart, Jake rested his forehead against hers, and Sarah could feel his smile in the darkness. "I've been wanting to do that all day," he whispered. "What took you so long?" Sarah whispered back, surprising herself with her boldness. Jake laughed, a sound full of joy and relief. "Next time, I won't wait so long." Emma appeared at Sarah's elbow then, chattering about baby horses and asking if they could come back next weekend. The spell of the moment broke, but the warmth of it lingered as Sarah and Emma said their goodbyes and headed home. "I really like him, Mom," Emma said as they drove back toward town. "And I really like Mark too. They're both just, I don't know, genuine? Like they don't pretend to be anything other than what they are." "I noticed that too," Sarah said. "Jake looks at you the way men look at women in movies. Like you're the most interesting person in the room." Sarah glanced at her daughter, surprised by the maturity of the observation. "How do you know how men look at women in movies? I pay attention to stuff like that. Dad never looked at you that way, not even before things got bad between you.
He looked at you like you were just part of the furniture or something. The comment stung because it was accurate, but it also made Sarah grateful for this new perspective Emma was getting on relationships. Her daughter was learning that women deserved to be looked at like they mattered, like they were worth someone's complete attention and admiration. Over the next month, Sarah and Jake fell into a comfortable pattern of seeing each other 2 or 3 times a week.
Sometimes it was dinner in town, sometimes it was Sarah driving out to the ranch with Emma for writing lessons with Mark. Once, Jake came into the library while Sarah was working, ostensibly to check out a book about horse training, but really just to see her and steal a few minutes of conversation between her helping other patrons.
Sarah's divorce proceedings moved forward with surprising smoothness. David was generous with child support and splitting their assets, probably motivated by guilt about the affair, and eager to start his new life with Melissa without the complication of a bitter ex-wife. Sarah found herself feeling grateful for his guilt since it made the legal process much easier than it could have been. The holidays came and went in a blur of new traditions.
Sarah and Emma spent Thanksgiving at the ranch with Jake and Mark, a quiet celebration that felt more like family than many of the forced gatherings Sarah remembered from her marriage. Christmas was split between David's new apartment and a cozy evening at Sarah's house, where Jake helped her and Emma make cookies and watch old movies.
By Valentine's Day, Sarah realized she was completely in love with Jake Sullivan, and the knowledge didn't scare her the way she'd expected it to. This love felt different from what she'd had with David, steadier, more mature, built on genuine compatibility rather than youthful passion and shared circumstances. Jake seemed to understand her in ways David never had, appreciated her intelligence and her sense of humor, and her fierce protectiveness of Emma. He never made her feel like she had to choose between being a good mother and being an interesting woman. Instead, he seemed to love her more because of how much she loved her daughter. On a warm evening in March, almost exactly 6 months after that first flat tire, Jake asked Sarah to take a walk with him around the ranch after dinner. Emma was in the barn with Mark, learning how to braid a horse's mane, and the setting sun was painting everything in golden light. They walked hand in hand through the pastures, stopping to pet horses and admire the new foals that had been born that spring. Sarah felt perfectly content, perfectly at peace in a way she'd never experienced before. "Sarah," Jake said as they reached the pond at the far end of the property, "I need to ask you something." Something in his tone made her look at him more carefully. He seemed nervous, but happy nervous, not worried nervous. "Okay," she said, though her heart was starting to race.
Jake stopped walking and turned to face her fully, taking both of her hands in his. "I know we haven't been together very long, and I know you're still getting used to being divorced.
But I also know that I love you more than I've ever loved anyone, and I can't imagine my life without you in it." Sarah's breath caught as Jake dropped to one knee beside the pond, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket. "Sarah Martinez, you walked into my life when I needed you most, and you've made every day better just by being in it. I love your strength and your kindness, and the way you make me laugh. I love how much you love Emma, and I love the way you've made this ranch feel like home in a way it never did before." Sarah was crying now, happy tears that blurred her vision but couldn't hide the sincerity in Jake's green eyes.